Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Hi, today is the 3rd of July 2026, and I'm talking to Kurt Budge, CEO of Leading Edge Materials. In my view, Leading Edge is a stock with an increasingly good potential of increasing 10x or more over the coming 5 years. Today, we will talk about the recent fantastic news that Leading Edge has finally been granted an exploitation permit. That is a massive step toward eventually producing heavy rare earth elements, potentially worth 25 to 50 times today's market cap. Leading Edge Materials is a mining company with 3 separate assets, not least NORRA share in Sweden. NORRA share has a large and concentrated deposit of heavy rare earth elements. The heavy ones are critical raw materials for producing the strongest and most effective self-sustaining magnetic material required for electrical motors and wind turbines, among other things. Apart from electrical cars and wind power, not least humanoid robots that require hundreds of small, efficient and strong actuators, each should fuel demand for heavy rare earth elements. So, the demand is not in question. Neither is the size and value of leading edge deposits in NORRA share. The issue with leading edge materials and its stock has always been the lack of permits to extract and sell its materials. So the question today is, has this recent decision by the Swedish government changed things for real this time for leading edge materials? So let's talk to Kurt Budge, CEO of Leading Edge Materials, about the recent developments for the company and what the future holds for Leading Edge and its HREE deposits in NORRA share. Hi, Kurt.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning to you too. The Swedish government just this week granted an exploitation permit for NORRA share. What does that actually mean for Leading Edge? Is this a real game changer? And what more is needed before you can actually start producing stuff in NORRA share?
Yeah, it's a real game changer. It's I would describe it as an inflection point for the company and the project. The exploitation concession gives you 25-year rights to develop the deposit. And so prior to having the exploitation concession, you really only have exploration permits. So this actually gives us rights over the deposit, which is a real de-risking event. And looking ahead, there are other permitting stages, specifically environmental permitting, but this is the key milestone.
How can you tell us more about the difference between the exploitation permit and the environmental permit? I mean, if you call it a game changer that you now have 25 years to develop the asset, but you do really need the environmental permit to actually get the stuff out of the ground.
Yeah, so the exploitation concession, you really prove the case that there is an economic reason to develop the mineral the ore body. And so that's what we've done. And also with that application and with this permission, we have proved the case around a bit sort of a base level environmental impact assessment. So we've satisfied in this particular case, we satisfied 2 länsstyrelsen, the county administrative boards of Jönköping and Östergötland. They endorsed the application, and then we satisfied the mining inspectorate. They recommended that the concession be awarded, and they handed it to the government for a final decision. And the government has also acknowledged that this deposit should be moved forward to the next stage of permitting. When it comes to environmental permitting, it's more detail around the precise development of the project, the design of the project, but also the actual operation of the project. So we go into greater detail with regards to how the site is configured, how the site is laid out, how the operations will be conducted, the nature of the activities, and potential environmental impacts, so that everybody understands that this operation can run responsibly with minimal environmental impact. I would just add that these steps have been previously taken by the company. So, as you will appreciate, NORRA Share has a long life. There's actually 15 years of technical work since 2011, and that's studies across all technical disciplines, but also environmental studies. So there's actually a huge amount of information that we get to leverage now to try and expedite the next stage of permitting. And just one final point. The redesign of this project that took place in the late teens, when we did a new economic study in 2021, really split away some of the activities around chemical nature, industrial activities that were previously permitted to take place on site. We've now decided to locate those on an industrial site. So effectively, what you've got at NORRA Share is nothing more than a quarry. And if you look across the other side of Vetten, you see a Sibelco quarry, and I'm sure there's other construction quarries in the area for construction materials. So yeah, our activities and what we're proposing is really the same that take place already in the area around Vetten.
And do the relevant decision makers appreciate this fully and take it into account? Because it seems as if the environmentalists they really don't. They don't even talk about the differences. They just say this is a mine.
I think the challenge to your first point, yes, I do, and I think that's why we've got the endorsement of the county administrative boards and the recommendation of the mining inspectorate and the decision from the government this week. So fundamentally, the authorities that are taking in consultation responses from local stakeholders and taking in all these concerns, they are evaluating those through the process of getting an exploitation concession. There's a lot of question answering. We had to answer a lot of questions and provide more information, and then that information satisfied the authorities that yes, we can take this project forward. I think because of the long history, the opposition is using arguments associated with the previous design. That's, our operation now is a quarry. That's all it is. It's no different to other activities taking place in the area. But what it does do is it liberates heavy rare earth elements, which are critical to permanent magnet supply chains in Europe and overall industrial resilience. So that's the key differentiator. We're not developing a construction materials quarry. We're developing something that's strategically important. But I don't think, if I was in an opposition, I'd probably be using all the arguments to my advantage. We, as a company, we have to come up with facts and evidence to support the arguments that we make. And that's what we've been able to do with the authorities that have looked at the application and decided to grant us the exploitation concession in this case.
Can you explain a little bit more about what a quarry versus something with wet chemistry is? So a quarry, as I understand it, you simply just crush rock.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. It's literally the nature of the activities as they're currently designed for NORRA Share now are excavation of rock, crushing, grinding, magnetic separation, and from that process you then generate industrial minerals, nepheline, syenite, feldspar, and then you generate the mineral concentrate that has the heavy rare earths in it, which will then go to the industrial site, which we've yet to determine the appropriate location, but a site that has similar activities with authorities that know how to permit and control those activities, and then that will get processed to produce, at this stage, either a mixed rare earth oxide or a mixed rare earth carbonate, which then feeds into the refiners and separators that already exist in Europe.
And that would take place in places that already have permits to do that kind of chemistry.
Exactly. There's similar activities already taking place. So you have authorities that are not really looking at a project as the first time they've ever tried to evaluate or assess a chemical industries project. They understand the nature of the activities.
And who is the actual opposition, and what can they do in NORRA Share? Who is the institutions or people?
As to names and faces, I don't know the exact opposition. I know that there have been historical activists as far as I'm concerned, as the CEO of the company, we have prepared a good application. We have met the requirements. What this process shows, because we've gone through all these different stages with the Länsstyrelsen, with the mining inspectorate, with the government, this is how the process is supposed to work in Sweden. So these are your checks and balances, that the law and the different regulations are used for a company to develop its project, for the authorities to assess, and if you've done the work, you should get the permit. Now, whatever arguments opposition try and use, they will have to prove their case. And similarly, I think there's a responsibility both on the developer, which is us, to explain our project properly to stakeholders, to be transparent in how we're going about developing NORRA share, but also there's a responsibility on the people in opposition not to be using arguments that are unsubstantiated. You have to be fact-based, and we are fact-based as a company. We're a public company, so we get scrutinized by the markets and the regulators of those markets, and I'd be out of a job if I told lies.
Before proceeding with the actual timeline of the environmental permit process and eventual construction of the mine, who can the latest permit, this exploitation permit, can that be contested or appealed in any way?
Yeah, the exploitation concessions can always be contested. I tend, that's a process outside of my control. Excuse me. If somebody wants to appeal the government's decision, then they can always do that. That's the right for appeal. That's the right of appeal in Sweden, but that doesn't impact what we do, because in that case, they would be appealing the government's decision. We wouldn't necessarily be a party to any action, and so therefore we continue with our work. And I think, again, going to my point, we have passed several tests to get to this stage: Länsstyrelsen, Bergsstaten, and now the government. And so everybody should have confidence that the right work has been done to take this project forward. And I think too often in the past, people frustrate processes. Let's face it, if NORRA share was in production now, there would be customers biting our hands off to buy the heavy rare earths. Back in 2014, there was a study written, the European Rare Earth Competency Network, which said that if NORRA share had access to capital and permitting issues were sorted, it would be in production by 2020. Last November, I was in Brussels. I was in Brussels several times last year. There was a Reuters article that said there's a crisis in heavy rare earths, specifically dysprosium and terbium, which are the two key ones that NORRA share produces in substantial volumes. And then the third one, yttrium, which has also come to the attention as being critical to European industry. And at the same time, the CEO of Vakuumschmelze, Germany's largest permanent magnet manufacturer, was also saying we have to do more. And so, our job now is to deliver NORRA share in the shortest possible time frame, and see what we can do technically, and then sort of put the challenge down to the regulators and decision makers to see if they can match the execution skills of the company.
So if I get this right, sorry to linger on the exploitation. If somebody, an institution or a person challenges the exploitation decision, that will just run in parallel and doesn't even become relevant for the environmental permits, because that will just go on in the Constitutional Court or in the Supreme Court with two other parties while you keep doing your work. And would you be able to get the environmental permit, you think, even if that process isn't finished yet in regarding a potential appeal for
as far as yes, in answer, okay. because as far as we're concerned, and as far as the government's concerned, that we have the piece of paper which says we have an exploitation concession. There isn't another piece of paper that says we don't. And as far as the exploitation concession is not put on hold just because somebody else decides to appeal for whatever reason. And I've experienced in my time, both in the Nordics, anybody can appeal anything with any set of arguments. And it takes the core, and it creates this uncertainty, which is entirely unnecessary, because what we don't have with actually the exploitation concession, which we do have when we get the environmental permits and building permits and what have you, is we don't have the right to go and start digging a hole at NORRA share or putting in access roads or setting up infrastructure. We just have the rights to move to the next stage. And this is a good thing for Swedish stakeholders, because it means that there is more assessment of the project to take place. There was a good LinkedIn post put out by the lawyer at Svemin this week that made exactly this point, that getting an exploitation concession isn't the end of the process for developing a project. And this is why it's Sweden has a leadership position in both mining, but also environmental regulation, is that you have these checks and balances, and you have responsible companies like us who want to develop these projects in the right way. My value set is very similar to all stakeholders. But at the same time, I'm trying to deliver these heavy rare earth elements, dysprosium, terbium, yttrium, because there's a societal need for either energy transition or, in recent years, defense applications. So there's also, there's a requirement for me to do my job to the best of my ability as well.
So let's talk about the timeline going forward. The environmental permit, you already have a lot of technical work done, but I guess to actually deliver the application will take some time, maybe a year or so from now, before you can actually hand in the finished application.
I think with regards to environmental permitting, and again, we're just trying to accept that we've actually got the exploitation concession, because I never assumed that we're going to actually achieve the milestone. Excuse me. So now we've got that. We're actually, and because it's the summer, things tend to slow down a little bit. But there's a lot of thinking going on now in terms of our exact plan for getting to the point at which we can submit an environmental permit application. I would estimate at the front end, and we will be doing more detailed work on this, that it's 6 to 9 months. Our overall timeline for NORRA share is to be in production within 4 years. But I will say that, as I said a few minutes ago, is that we will be looking technically, because we can leverage all this historical work and because there's such a good knowledge base of the deposit, we will be looking at what is the sensible timeline that we can actually deliver this in, where we can technically deliver it. And then we will be presenting that plan to the authorities and say, can we match this in terms of permitting? Because this is been the main challenges with developing projects, mining projects specifically in the Nordics, is that we can't deliver projects in the same timeframes that are being achieved elsewhere in the world. And so that makes us, and I say us because I've been working in Sweden a very long time, less competitive. And I think this government and the words of Ebba Busch have been all about permitting processes need to be more efficient, because if they're more efficient, that makes Sweden more competitive. So I'm trying to tap into that energy.
What do you think we outsiders, small shareholders, can actually see in terms of the process over either the coming 40 to 48 months or let's say the coming 12 months before we get an environmental permit? What kind of back and forth in terms of applications or developing work will we see? So what are our milestones for covering leading edge?
I think specifically having the exploitation concession, I just take a step back. Mm-hmm. I was in Frankfurt in June for the Rare Earth Industry Association conference. You have all the players throughout the entire value chain, from the miners to the original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs, and then everybody in between, the refiners, the separators, the metallizers, the permanent magnet manufacturers, and the traders and everybody. And if I had the piece of paper that said I have an exploitation concession, when I start talking about the project, I can say we as a company have got Europe's most advanced heavy rare earth project that's strategically important to permanent magnet value chain in Europe. And and I have the mining lease. It gives me 25-year mining rights. The conversation I would have had lots of really interesting conversations. Unfortunately, at that time, I was in a position where I said, I've got this really great project. I've got this great deposit, but I'm waiting for a decision from the Swedish government. So unfortunately, I wish the decision had come a few weeks earlier, because there are plenty of people that are interested in securing the offtake of dysprosium, terbium, and yttrium. And so that's one of the key things. Can we, in the near term, in before the end of the year or within the next year, strike an offtake agreement? Because that, again, is a real tick in the box for the validity and the need for the project. And then also we're coming up with a new pre-feasibility study. So we did a pre-feasibility study specifically on rare earths back in 2015. We then improved the economic case by adding industrial minerals into the project, because the material is being processed and we're digging it up. We just weren't selling it. So we've got an economic case now, which is based on industrial minerals and rare earths. So that was the scoping study in 2021. So we now have to just move that up a level to get everything on the same level as a pre-feasibility study. But fundamentally, the engineering around the open pit is the same. There's some refinement to the mineral processing that needs to take place in terms of our understanding of what we need to do with the material when we crush it, when we grind it, and when we separate it magnetically. But I believe that we can get through that work quickly. And so, I'm still pushing for completing the pre-feasibility study by the end of the year. So those are the two of the key things. We firmly put ourselves on the map in Europe with regards to the exploitation concession. We've had very early interactions with regards to people that are interested in our offtake of the heavy rare earths. And then we're moving quickly to a new updated economic study. And that pre-feasibility study, that enables you then to have better conversations with the likes of the European Investment Bank. So what we then start to do is we then start to make ourselves interesting to non-dilutive financing opportunities. So, instead of always having to go to equity capital markets, excuse me, we get the opportunity to come up with some of the green the grants or the green loan finance that is available, which comes at a lower cost of capital. Just final point. We see, specifically in the US, is copying the Chinese playbook with putting public capital to work in the rare earth value chain. And that has been incredible. And specifically what I've seen in recent weeks, and last week we saw Energy Fuels, a US company, that's received significant financial support from the US administration, by Vacuum Schmelze, Germany's largest permanent magnet manufacturer. Earlier in the year, we saw USA Rare Earths buy a stake in KÄRR, the refiner separator in France, what have you. So in my world, the US is buying up European rare earth real estate. And so therefore, I think, member states in Europe need to find ways of actually creating the capability. There needs to be new financing tools, because at the moment, all the stakeholders in our space are looking at leading edge to develop one of the most strategically important heavy rare earth assets in Europe, if not the most important, and certainly the closest to production.
Yeah, you would almost think that some large private equity firm would be a better owner of leading edge than the stock market. You don't have to comment on that. Regarding the economics, the last PFS in 2021, 5 years ago now, I think it showed about a 200 million annual EBITDA for NORRA share. Is your best guess? Well, my best guess is that number should have increased by now. Higher prices, more strategic need, and also this balkanization of the market, where you have regional markets. The Europe wants to be self-sustaining for heavy rare earth elements, for example, and that should mean actually a more predictable and better market for NORRA share.
Yeah, so on the last point, that's one of the biggest changes this year, is the bifurcation in the heavy rare earths market. And that's been driven really by Chinese export restrictions, which started in April 2025. And what you see is domestic prices in China, and you see regional prices here in Europe, and they're significantly different. And again, in terms of the pricing support for development of assets, whether or not they be upstream or midstream, to put in security of pricing to give investors confidence that they should invest in the assets and the opportunities. That's all starting to be to formalize. So this has been the biggest change in terms of actually making the creation of a permanent magnet value chain from mining to magnets in Europe a reality. Because prior to that, say for example, OEMs in different parts of the market are still procuring from China. What changes that is that, well, China, we know that China can turn the tap off at any one time. I believe in the fullness of time that China will be a strong trading partner. I hope it will be, of Europe and the member states, but it doesn't mean that Europe should not have its own capability, and that's what the Critical Raw Materials Act was introduced for. So, in terms of the economics of NORRA share, we haven't updated the scoping study that was done in 2021. That's the new PFS that we're working on now. What we did do this year, which might be interesting for listeners, is that we engaged Edison Group to provide independent research of the company and to look at some of the issues that you've just mentioned, the pricing and what have you, and the strategic need. And they produced an initiation note in April. They also updated that with a Dysprosium equivalent analysis in June. So that can be found at Edison Group's website, and if you put that and leading edge materials into Google, and their 50% risk valuation, net present value at a 10% discount rate, was $900 million. That was 50% risk weighted. So the value of this project compared to our market cap, the upside is significant. And clearly that valuation was done prior to us having the exploitation concession. Classically, the way markets used to work is you used to get big rewards for hitting milestones like getting a key permit. That was considered a real de-risking event and a real re-rating event. With all the instability in the world and in markets, and depending on whichever way the wind's blowing and what Donald Trump has put on Truth Social, you've no idea what reward you're going to get in the market. So to your point, the way of financing NORRA share to date, it's bizarre to me given the way other rare earth projects are being financed in the world. And when we talk about private equity, and I know you didn't say I had to comment, but Vacuum Schmelz was 51% owned, I thought, or majority owned by a US private equity firm. I've seen them, US PE or PE in general, investing in processing assets, midstream, downstream, mining assets for the issues that we've talked about. Permitting fundamentally have tended to be something that, especially development projects, that PE stay away from. However, you see this in Canada, that development projects like the Torngap project, Cerberus in the US is an investor in that company. So yeah, it's not a hard and fast rule, but definitely we as a project, because of the strategic need for NORRA shares, should be able to access non-dilutive finance to the benefit of our equity shareholders.
So simply debt financing, and that would unlock a value that, let's say, it costs $500 million to build the mine, and then the annual cash flow of $200 million or more, if I'm correct, that would all come to the equity holders.
Yeah.
Just assuming that you already were producing, let's say, dysprosium, how much dysprosium in terms of Europe's total need of dysprosium would you be able to produce annually?
So the Edison research note done back in April estimated that Europe's annual need was around 180 to 200 tons a year. We don't talk in thousands of tons when we're talking heavy rare earths. And a NORRA share will produce estimated to produce 248 tons a year. Now, that earlier point I made around the Reuters article last November about the crisis in heavy rare earths, Lynas Rare Earths, who are one of the largest rare earth companies outside of China, based in Australia, last October, they announced an expansion of their Malaysian processing facility. And the nameplate capacity of that facility was going to be 250 tons of dysprosium. Now, NORRA share is 248, and then 50 tons of terbium, and NORRA share is 36. So, we are of an equivalent stature to one of the leading rare earth companies established in the sector. So that's what makes the project, it could satisfy all of Europe's dysprosium needs, current dysprosium needs, not that they aren't going to grow in the future. And then it's also providing, the terbium and also the yttrium that we mentioned earlier.
If leading edge gets to that point where you can produce and is allowed to produce 250 tons a year, can there be other producers as well within Europe, meaning that there is too much dysprosium produced?
I think what we see happening, especially in Europe, is collaboration in the supply chain. So if we were to strike an offtake agreement with the European downstream, it's a case of that will be a long-term offtake. This is a long-term partnership, because when you're processing rare earths, and certainly when you're doing separation, these are fine margins in terms of your understanding of the material that's flowing through the system. And there are definitely partners in Europe, and it's all about partnership. So it's not a case of, say, for example, KÄRR, which I don't know what the development timeline is. The last time I looked, LKB's deposit, which they announced a few years ago, that produces, or in total, that has a similar tonnage of heavy rare earths, but yet it's not as accessible as NORRA share, and certainly we are more advanced in actually developing our project. But there will be, hopefully, for Europe's benefit and for Sweden's benefit, there will be other sources of supply, because the need, as we electrify society and we move away from fossil fuels, and as we make sure that we have all the rare earths we need for our defense requirements, then hopefully the demand will be greater. And so therefore there's room for all. And also, not necessarily that we need to use Chinese supply if it's not available.
And talking of supply, I mean, even if you or some other companies were producing, let's say, dysprosium and terbium, does Europe have the refining capacity ready, or does that have to be built over the coming 4 years and then try to match the production of the material or the minerals?
So our project is in the two parts. So our industrial facility will produce a mixed rare earth carbonate. The home for that mixed rare earth carbonate, this is it's poorly understood about the European sector, is that there is a rare earths ecosystem. So the refiners and separators, there are well-established companies like Solvay in France and Neo Performance Materials in Estonia. And then you also have new entrants that are going to start production. I think KÄRR starts production this year or next year. So yes, the refining and the separation capacity is already there, and the expertise is already there. So all those the downstream wants, they want feed because there's a market. So that's the beauty of the timing of our project now.
And let's just finally again remind listeners of what this stuff is actually used for. Right now, all the attention is on AI and data centers, and also in a bit starting on humanoid robots. And humanoid robots need small, super efficient actuators. That's actually small motors in the hundreds per robot. I guess those need the best permanent magnet motors.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
most
so
definitely. If you did this, I haven't got the numbers exactly to mind, but many of the Hague the Hague Institute that studies defense requirements or defense needs, and they have a slide which shows where heavy rare earths input into all sorts of armaments. I know because that's front of mind for a lot of Europeans, especially Nordic nations these days, is around the security of our borders. But also the permanent magnets that go into humanoid robots, but also into the growth of the energy transition, the wind turbines that are needed, the electrical vehicles that are needed, all of these things, and some medical applications all require magnets. And this is where dysprosium, terbium at the moment, there's a lot of research taking place into how you can substitute, but that isn't there now, and it won't be there for the foreseeable future. So that's why we need to create the options for supply now as quickly as possible to create that resilience, which has been the buzzword talked about by the European Union and member states. Ebba Busch again, describing rare earths as Sweden's security asset, effectively. So we're just we're right place, right time.
And the smaller and more effective and stronger motors you need, the more you need the heavy rare earth elements to create these, right?
Yeah, I use the tagline magic dust, because if you don't have the magic dust, you really don't have the performance. And if you don't have the performance, then your application is at jeopardy.
And that means, for example, that if you really want to have agile humanoid robots or super fast and agile drones for warfare or inspection or anything, you need to have the absolute best permanent magnets, and that's what you need dysprosium for.
It's precision, performance, precision, and longevity.
And that's all the questions I have. I mean, I'm really stoked for the coming year. I so much hope to see a strong news flow, but I'm pretty used now to wait about a year between the really great news. But this one was a 15-year great news to finally hit the ticker.
Yeah, and fundamentally, this was really the starting gun. Because, we have already been here once before. And clearly 2013, when we had a mining lease before, was a different time. Now we have positive policy in Europe, progressive government in Sweden trying to make Sweden more efficient and competitive. And we have a huge supply story. So again, we've got the most strategically important asset for heavy rare earths, dysprosium, terbium, and yttrium. We're in one of the best mining jurisdictions in the world, and the responsibility is down on us as a company to try and deliver this project as quickly as possible.
Usually about this time of year, Leading Edge does a directed share issue to finance operations for the coming year. Do you think you will be able to sidestep that this time because of this recent development, or do you think it's more business as usual, at least for a few more months?
I think that you're right. In the past years, we've always raised capital around this time. The award of the exploitation concession is really a catalyst for being able to have conversations like this with investors and people that are paying attention to the story. Excuse me. Unsurprising to you, who's somebody invested in the junior mining capital markets, companies in the junior space are always looking at their opportunities to raise capital because, we're an ambitious company and we've now created this de-risking event. It's a milestone for the company. It's transformational. And so really it's now the opportunity for us is to push on and accelerate.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for talking to me today, and best of luck. And I'm looking forward to your PMs.
Yeah, we'll be putting out lots of news, hopefully.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.